Okay, good morning slash good afternoon, class. This is Mr. Harris with you, and I'm trying to really quickly record a 2021 version of our executive branch presentation. We are starting our new unit here, guys, and I promise I will get to a lot of your grading very soon. And I plan on returning to actually teaching you guys synchronously next week. Okay, but let's get going into our executive branch. So the executive branch is, of course, dominated by the office of the president and everyone the president gets to appoint. So quickly, name as many presidents as you can. If you guys want to stop the video for a second, you can. Just come up with a quick list. Let's see what's in our head. Okay. Whenever you're ready, go ahead and push play again on the video, if you can hear this right now. So the executive branch, of course, is our current holder of the presidency, Joe Biden. And then here is our list of presidents throughout our history. Joe Biden is number 46, but there's actually only been 45 presidents. One served 2 non-consecutive terms. But this is our giant list of all the presidents throughout history. And no, this will not be on the exam. You have to memorize all these, although this would be a great extra credit question. I put in the notes some other significance for some of these people. For historical significance, I just put them in bold, the people I think that you've probably heard of or had an out-large effect on American history, or at least be remembered that way. I also want to point out, of course, that our country has a very troubled history. And if you look the Second American Revolution or the Civil War, a lot of our presidents at that time period were still slave owners throughout that period in history, including, I think it's like 6 out of the first 8 or something like that, or something crazy. I also put died in office in red. Some of these were by natural-ish causes. Some of these were by assassination. We have not had a president die in office since 1963. John F. Kennedy, of course, was assassinated. I also put in blue impeached. Okay, so this means that the Congress at least began the effort to kick them out of office. Now, Nixon wasn't technically impeached, but he is the president who had to resign in disgrace. All right. So what does the president / the executive branch actually do? The president must carry out or execute the laws. They enforce the laws. The legislative branch, they write the laws, then the president has to carry them out. Of course, there's lots of other things the president does as well, but this is what's supposed to be their primary function as laid out in the Constitution. Okay. For qualifications, and these are some numbers and things you will have to know, you have to be 35 years old, 25 for a representative, 30 for a senator, 35 to be president, and those are kind of going up in order of power. You must be a native-born citizen. So this has never been constitutionally challenged in the courts or anything like that, but this means you have to be either born in the United States or born to a parent who is a U.S. citizen, okay? You must be a resident in the U.S. for at least the last 14 years prior to being elected. I've never heard that come up before, okay? A president may serve up to 2 4-year terms. So the current president, Joe Biden, was just elected. If he is reelected and decides to run in 2024, he could be president until January of 2029. So 8 years is kind of the normal maximum, okay? However, if let's say 2 years from now, so more than 2 years into Joe Biden's presidency, if he were to pass away and Kamala Harris became president, or excuse me, Kamala Harris became president, she could get elected 2 more times as well. But you can't be president more than 10 years total. If Joe Biden were to pass away right now, Ms. Harris could only run for 1 more term. Okay. And this was all laid out in the 22nd Amendment. Originally, there were no term limits for president, but only one president in history served more than 8 years. And that would, of course, be FDR, who was elected 4 times and was president for about 12 and a half years before dying in his final term in 1945. So our presidential elections are held every 4 years. We just went through one, and we saw the new president and vice president take their oaths of office on either January 20th or the first day after it falls on a Sunday. And that big ceremony is called the inauguration, which is usually a giant kind of celebration for the party that won the presidency. And during that ceremony, the president, with the Supreme Court justice, takes the oath of office in front of the nation. So why would you want to be president? Well, besides being automatically maybe the most powerful person on the planet, you do get some salary, $400,000. Although most of our recent presidents have been independently wealthy, so they have insisted on donating their salary instead of taking it. I'm going to pause for 1 second. President Trump and President Obama both donate their salary to different government institutions. You also get some entertainment and travel expenses, although it seems like you can just do whatever you want. If we look at some of the bills from the last administration, you get, of course, to live in the White House, use Air Force One, and the use of Camp David, which is a vacation spot in Maryland. Our last president referred instead to go to his own private resort at Mar-a-Lago. Of course, healthcare and retirement benefits if you can't afford them yourself. Harry Truman was not doing very well financially, so they put in place a stipend for the president in case they're ever poor, because it would be a bad look for the country to have kind of a destitute president wandering around. Here is a picture of Air Force One, which is really like a floating office in the sky that's supposed to keep the president safe when they are traveling. Okay. Now, what about the person that they run for election with, the vice president? Okay. And really, as laid out in the Constitution, the vice president only has two jobs. One, take over if the president should die or be unable to perform his or her duties. And there's been 9 times when the VP has had to take over the office of the presidency. They're also technically the president of the Senate, which is mostly a ceremonial position, except when there's a tie in the Senate. And as we discussed in class, right now we have a 50-50 Democratic-Republican deadlock. So Ms. Harris is going to come in a lot to cast the deciding vote. Originally, whoever got second in the presidential election was the vice president. So right now it would be Biden-Trump. But of course, early on, the government realized that was ridiculous to have opposing factions competing against each other in the executive branch. So that was chosen to now they run on the same ticket together. Okay. And as we just talked about, we have that deadlock in the Senate. So the Democrats really wanted to get through their 2021 stimulus plan, the American Rescue Plan, and the vote was tied 50-50 in the Senate. Our Vice President, Kamala Harris, was able to come in and cast the deciding vote to get that plan passed through office. And because of this deadlock, she is probably going to do this a lot of times if the Democrats can all get on board with any particular bill. Now, we have the order of succession. Okay, who takes over if someone were to die or to become incapacitated? And of course, the VP is the first up. Then it's the Speaker of the House. So sometimes it's of the opposite party. Right now, Miss Nancy Pelosi is a Democrat. And then after this is like the senior most leader president of the Senate, the guy who's been there the longest from whatever party the president's in. And that is right, or excuse me, whatever party has the majority. And right now that is Patrick Leahy from Vermont. And then after that, there's a bunch of different cabinet positions, which we'll talk about probably tomorrow, some different cabinet stuff. And right now, the next person in line is the Secretary of State, a man named Anthony Blinken. And there is the very, very senior Mr. Leahy from Vermont, and the much younger, but still gray hair, Secretary Blinken. So these people are fourth and fifth in line to the presidency if something were to happen. Usually, we've never had someone come in and become the president who did not get elected to at least the vice presidency. So, however, if the VP dies, resigns, etc., and the president still is office, The president can nominate their own new vice president, and it must make it through a Senate and House confirmation. So if for some reason Ms. Harris had to retire or she passed away, Joe Biden can pick his own person, but they have to get to the House and the Senate. And one of the most interesting cases where this actually came into play was with disgraced former President Nixon, who was originally elected in 1968. And he ran with a guy named Spiro Agnew. Okay. And Spiro Agnew was caught committing tax fraud and was forced to resign over this. So Nixon was able to pick a new vice president, and he picked a representative, so just the 2-year position person, named Gerald Ford from Michigan, who was actually a former collegiate football player there as well. So he became the new vice president. Then old Tricky Dick Nixon was forced to resign as the result of the Watergate scandal, which was he had a team of thugs pretty much break into the Democratic headquarters and wiretap all their conversations and record their plans, and then tried to cover it up. And so when Nixon resigned, Ford became president without ever being elected to a national office. So he just won one district in Michigan and then found himself as the president. He did not win his reelection, and he lost to Jimmy Carter from Georgia. What are the powers and roles of the president? Okay. And with the president wears many hats is sometimes an expression we hear because they do so many different things for this nation. You have to remember a little bit of the country's history. Most of our politics is imported from the UK, but a lot of it is also based on the old Roman system. And in the UK, the head of state is still the monarch, although the prime minister fills that role more politically today. So when we had a new country, they didn't want a king, they didn't want an emperor like they had in the old Roman times. So they kind of had to invent this new position as president. Originally, his role was his or her role in the future was somewhat limited. However, they've had to, in response to different historical events, mutate the position, and it's really expanded over time. A lot of modern historians will talk about the imperial presidency, especially as America commands a massive overseas empire. It requires the head of state to do certain things that maybe wasn't envisioned at all by the founders of the country. So the president's forced to wear many hats, and this is just our last couple of presidents wearing some hats. And one thing the president does, and you'll see this a lot right now as they're looking at that Voting Rights Act and then maybe also statehood for DC, is the president is the legislative leader. Okay, they're the most powerful official in the country. They're the de facto head of his or her political party. So as the legislative leader, they kind of tell Congress, hey, I want you guys to pass this bill. They give marching orders to members of their party. Now, if the opposition party controls the legislative branch, then probably nothing much happens, okay? President Trump, after losing the House in 2018 to the Democrats, was unable to pass any meaningful legislation after that. So they can kind of choose the direction their political party is going to turn into. They're also the chief of state. They represent the U.S. around the world, okay, in both a like figurehead type role, but an active, engaging diplomatic political role. They're also responsible for carrying out the laws of the country. Congress passes the law, then it's up to the president through his attorney generals, DEA, whatever he's got, to make sure those laws are carried out. So, you know, the Congress just passed this new American Rescue Plan / stimulus bill, and part of that was $1,400 checks to most Americans. Well, the president then says, how can I carry this out? Oh, I control the IRS. So the IRS then pays those people the money on the president's orders. So the president has to make the orders of Congress actually happen. And of course, they're the chief executive. They make final decisions on so many different things. And they have a check and balance over any legislation that is passed. They have this veto power. So if for some reason the House and Senate passed a bill right now that Joe Biden didn't like, he could just say, nah, and not sign it. And likelihood the bill will die. Now, of course, the House and the Senate with a 2/3 majority can overwhelm the president's veto, but that is extraordinarily rare. Okay. Like we said, Congress can't override the veto. It doesn't happen very often. And if we look at the Constitution in Article 2 about the executive branch, it does not list the president's responsibilities at great length. Okay. So, not a lot of stuff in there. The president also gives a State of the Union address every year, and it's usually in January, I believe, where he gets up in front of the whole country and says, the State of the Union is strong, and everyone cheers like crazy. And then he can list for an hour of like things of their accomplishments and what they want to get done in the next year. Yeah. So they tell, excuse me, guys, I'm very tired. My baby's been having a rough night. So they set forth the programs and policies for the nation in the State of the Union address. They're also the commander in chief of the armed forces. Technically, the president cannot declare war. But guess who's in charge of the nuclear codes? It's the president. And the president has pretty much almost unlimited unilateral first strike power in almost any situation. Okay. Now, I'm not going to get into a whole long thing about this because I could talk about this for a long time. Only Congress can declare war. However, Congress has pretty much ceded the responsibility of running wars and of starting them to the executive branch. Now, a lot of people will argue this is necessary. Congress moves slow kind of by design, and we cannot wait for them to debate whether or not we should take a military strike here or there. However, this pretty much lets the president do what they want to do for the most part, and then they just have to later on get Congress to allow them to keep doing it. Okay. And we've already seen so far in the Biden administration, they've launched some attacks at some targets in Syria. But of course, there's ongoing conflicts in so many places around the globe that the US military is involved in. So we have not officially declared war since World War II, but of course we've been involved in wars in Korea, Vietnam. We dropped more bombs on Cambodia than were dropped during all of World War II, even though we never officially declared war there. Of course, the wars of Iraq and Afghanistan, which have occurred the entirety of your guys' lifespan, and our actions in other places around the globe as well. So currently, the president has the ability to send troops into action in foreign lands. Now, the War Powers Act of 1973, which was kind of passed in response to the executive branch lying about the Vietnam War for 15 years, was supposed to limit somewhat what the president can do. And it pretty much says the troops that are sent abroad must be brought back within 60 days unless Congress approves the action. And 60 days can remove to 90 if needed for safe removal of troops. So if Joe Biden, for whatever reason, lost his mind and said, let's invade Cuba, he can just do that. And then Congress has at the minimum 60 days before they can say, no, you got to bring our troops home. Now, once they've actually sent into action, they have to notify Congress about it. But this allows the president almost dictatorial powers over America's foreign policy when they are in office. Okay. And foreign policy is the nation's plan for dealing with other nations of the world, how we conduct ourselves with our neighbors and with our allies, as well as with adversaries. Now, the president does have some judicial power, and the biggest one is the pardon. And the pardon is the ability to to forgive or remove. Sorry, I'm a little tired right now. To stop the punishment for a federal crime. So if you've been charged or convicted of a federal crime, the president can pretty much clear it from your record. Now, normally a pardon is an admission of guilt, okay? But we saw at the end of Donald Trump's administration, he didn't pardon many people. Some of them were people who were were serving really long sentences for minor crimes. A lot of times they are, of course, political allies. President Trump pardoned Joe Arpaio, the former sheriff in Maricopa County, Arizona, who was convicted of human rights abuses. Okay. And when President Ford became president, he pardoned Nixon, who had just resigned. And President Carter used it to pardon those who invaded the draft during Vietnam by moving abroad or other things like that. And then the president can also grant a reprieve, which is a postponement of the carrying out of a person's sentence. And then for some reason, we, of course, make a mockery of this every Thanksgiving when we pardon turkeys. Okay. They can also commute, which makes a convicted person's sentence less severe. The president then also, as we discussed, has the power to veto. The president can only reject a bill or veto it. They can't change one thing about it. And of course, the Congress can override the veto with 2/3 vote of each house. Franklin Roosevelt vetoed 635 bills, which is a lot. Harry Truman, 250, which is also a lot. It very rarely happens today because of our mixed government, where it's unusual the House and the Senate and the presidency are all aligned. So usually one bill doesn't get to the president before he has a chance to veto it. Now, there are supposed to be some limits on the president's power. We have limits on appointment. Okay, so the president, of course, gets to choose who he or she wants for different positions like Secretary of State, Secretary of Education, but those have to be approved by the Senate. Of course, Congress is supposed to have the control over the military actions. And then they can also be censored for foreign relations, and any treaties that the country joins must be ratified by the Senate. Our U.S. history people might remember that in World War I, after the end of World War I, they tried to create the League of Nations, and the U.S. Senate refused to ratify and never joined the League of Nations. Also, the president can only veto an entire thing, and it can be overwritten. And as we saw when the Democrats took control of the House in 2018, congressional oversight. The Congress can launch investigations and subpoena documents and look at what the president is doing and how they are, in fact, carrying out the laws, or if they are not. Okay. And then we have elections every 4 years. And so the idea is if the president is unpopular, there's a way of remedying that within 4 years. They can vote that person out of office. Okay. Now, do we have more of a need for presidential power? A lot of people would argue that, especially now as Congress has become more and more dysfunctional in some ways, and power really vacillates back and forth between whatever party is in control of the executive branch, be it through their use of executive orders. Okay. All right. Now, the judicial branch can also put some limits on the president's power. Okay. And they can declare things the president does, presidential actions, unconstitutional. And we saw an example of this in the Trump administration initially when they tried to block all Muslims from coming into the country. And the court said, no, that's not constitutional. Now, eventually they wrote it out differently and did get some approval. They eventually did get approval for their more limited use of their ban they had in place. Okay. And executive orders, as Congress has fails to pass a lot of laws, have become more and more important. An executive order is a rule or order issued by the president to an executive branch of the government and having the force of law. So the president can tell, for example, immigration, I want you to do this, or I don't want you to do this. And we've seen that go back and forth now over the last couple of administrations. And so it's things like the DEA, it's things like the IRS, the Immigration Customs Enforcement, the FBI. The president has so much authority, he runs those things, so you can kind of tell him, hey, I want you guys to do this way. The president, of course, is in charge of the military. And so the armed forces, which were segregated almost entirely through World War II, in World War I, they are a little bit desegregated. Terry Truman, before the Korean War, just by executive order, desegregated the armed forces. And there's, of course, some issues with this. If the president issues a ton of executive orders, well, the next president can come in and just say, nah, and just get rid of all of them. So Obama did issue a lot of executive orders when he was president, and Trump was able to get rid of a lot of them on his first day in office, just with signing a piece of paper. And then we see now Joe Biden is able to do the same thing with Donald Trump. Trump didn't pass a lot of legislation while he was president. He passed that big tax cut. He passed a little smaller criminal justice reform, but he issued a lot of executive orders. And because of that, his legacy is really, in some ways, from a legal perspective, able to be undone with just a new president coming into office. Now, if a Republican takes control in 2028, they can do the same thing. So this is what we were talking about before, Trump using some of the executive orders to block immigration from certain countries. And we see that Biden used a lot of executive orders right away. And I think he's up to like 48 or something now. And a lot of them, of course, were just undoing things Trump did, but he's also done a lot of other stuff like the, let's take a look at it right now. Stop border wall construction, because Trump never passed a law that gave him money to build his border wall. He just used executive power to take it from bits and places and try to build it. President Biden ended the Muslim travel ban. He rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement. They ended the Keystone XL pipeline, counting non-citizens in the census again, which Trump said we weren't allowed to do anymore. Trump also left the World Health Organization. We're going back in. As a new thing, the 100 days masking challenge. They extended eviction and foreclosure moratoriums. They kept a pause on student loan payments, which is someone with them. I'm thankful for that. The Dreamers program about undocumented people came here as young children. There's been a lot of talk about what's going on with immigration's custom and enforcement, and I want to see an investigation about what's happening there exactly. But we'll see what's going on there. They see a bunch of other things as well. And just undid a lot of Trump's executive orders. Okay, guys, we have some notes over this, and then tomorrow or the next day, we're going to look as well at some of the cabinet positions that the president controls and how they work exactly. We'll have an assignment over that as well. Thank you guys very much, and I'll talk to you soon.